In part 2 of our investigation on the functions of the pancreas, we're going to look at the pancreas's role in regulating something that we call blood glucose concentration. Now, for those that are unfamiliar with square bracket notation, this is a notation that's primarily used in chemistry. Square brackets indicate that we are measuring the concentration of a specific solute when dissolved in a solvent. In this case, the solvent is water in your blood. So we can measure concentration by measuring the amount of a given substance. In this case, it's the solute, the substance that is dissolved into a liquid. So in this case, we're looking at the amount of glucose divided by the volume of solvent that is used to dissolve it. So in this case, we call it your blood glucose concentration because we're measuring the amount of glucose that is dissolved within the liquid part of your blood. Now, this is a very important feature to regulate because very high concentrations of glucose inside of the blood can result in high blood pressure and overworking of the heart, whereas a low concentration of glucose means that your cells throughout the body are not receiving enough sugar in order to produce energy. So it's very important that the pancreas monitor the concentration of glucose, meaning the amount of glucose that is in circulation in your blood. And to that end, the pancreas produces a pair of hormones that are used in order to regulate the amount of glucose that either enters or leaves the blood. And these two hormones are insulin and glucagon. So as a little bit of background about where insulin and glucagon come from, your pancreas is actually made up of several different cell types. So the digestive enzymes that are produced and then travel to the small intestine are produced in the main pancreatic cells and then travel down this tube called the pancreatic duct, where they will eventually enter the small intestine. But we can see that there is a second type of cells that we can think of as little islands inside of your pancreas, which is why we call these pancreatic islet cells. Islet is just a word for a small island, referring to the fact that this type of cell has a different primary function than the rest of the cells of the pancreas that primarily produce digestive enzymes. So the way that insulin and glucagon work is relatively simple. For example, if the pancreas recognizes that there is a large amount of glucose floating around in the blood, this signals the pancreas to produce and release insulin. Now, insulin is going to travel to the liver because one of the primary functions of the liver is glucose storage, and the insulin is going to communicate to the liver, you need to help out our blood and suck as much of the glucose, not literally suck, we should probably use the word absorb instead, absorb as much of the glucose as possible out of the blood and store it for future use, because large amounts of glucose can cause blood pressure problems. And of course, in animals, we would store glucose as glycogen so that you can potentially use it when your body needs more energy. Now, in the opposite situation, if your pancreas recognizes that the concentration of glucose in your blood is low, this means that your blood is not supplying enough energy to the rest of the body, and this is a signal for your pancreas to produce and release the second hormone, glucagon, and glucagon's job is to tell the liver to do exactly the opposite. It's going to tell the liver to break down glycogen by doing hydrolysis reactions to break glycogen into individual glucose molecules, and once these glucose molecules are released, or are broken down rather, they are released into the blood, where your blood can carry these glucose molecules to the parts of your body that require energy the most. And so the pancreas's job is ultimately to regulate the production of these two hormones, which ultimately in turn keeps the amount of glucose that is floating around in your blood relatively balanced, not too much, but not so little as to deprive your cells of energy. This concludes our series on the function of the pancreas. Before you move on to the series looking at the functions of the small intestine, take a look at this case study here involving one of the most well-known genetic and nutritional disorders, diabetes, in which the pancreas loses or perhaps never developed the ability to produce the hormone insulin, and see if you can answer the questions below about what the consequences are if the pancreas fails to work, and then you can test your knowledge by trying these practice problems focused on the function of the pancreas below.